Welcome to Current Colonialism and Indigenous Perspectives with Gitz Crazyboy and Mark Tilsen. We are going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then I'll introduce the speakers briefly, give them the floor, and I'll come back to help navigate questions at the end if they need me. There is no need to save questions till the end. You can type them into the chat box or into the Q&A section, and then we'll address them at the end unless a speaker feels like they want to address it in real time. So I will do the land acknowledgement, and then I will pass it off. I will do a land acknowledgement, and then I will do their introductions, and then I'll pass it along. And a recognition that we are on stolen land is not enough when the genocide that we call history still continues today and is reinforced by the daily lives of those unaware. Residential schools only closed their last doors in 1997, but the mentality of the residential schools lives on. White people imagine living in a place that not only normalizes genocide, but actively covers it up. We don't live here because a peaceful treaty was signed. We live here because white people before us brutally pushed their way in. This includes our current government, RCMP, and church, and we need to acknowledge this and the harmful systems it brought with it before we can even attempt to create reconciliation. It is a privilege to not know that you are living in such a way that makes the genocidal reality seem like regular everyday life. I would still like to recognize that the stolen land I'm speaking from is rightfully the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nations and was forced to be the home of Treaty 7. These nations are Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani. Treaty 7 was signed on September 22, 1877 in a brutally unethical way. This treaty was not upheld. Treaty 7 includes the Tsuut'ina Nation, Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nations of Region 3. So, in short, this space is rightfully known as Mohkinstsis. The speakers that we have today, first is Mark Tilsen, comes from an activist family's long steeped in struggle for liberation for all people and the long-term survival of the Lakota Nation. At Standing Rock, he stepped into multiple roles. Since then, he has led trainings and teachings in and about the lessons learned from Standing Rock. He has spent much of his time helping fight against different pipelines, and his first book of poetry, It Ain't Over Until We're Smoking Cigars on the Drill Pad, recalls the struggles against the pipeline throughout a blend of journal entries and poems. You can find more information and that book on marktilsen.com. Gitz Crazyboy is a Siksika and Dene youth facilitator, born here in Mohkinstsis. Gitz works with youth and youth-focused programs. Gitz's passion and purpose is helping the next generation, and he has held many positions within the youth educator profession. Ever the activist for the environment and Indigenous rights, Gitz is known for his leadership and participation in the Idle No More movement. His novel Secret of the Stars has caught attention of national and international media such as the CBC and Australia's Indigenous radio station. For more information on him and his book, you can find it on gitzcrazyboy.com. And that is all for me. I'm going to pass things off, and I'll see you for the Q&A part.
All right. So we're going to start. So I'm from north of Medicine Line, and Mark is from south of Medicine Line. So he's what you'd be commonly known as the States. I'm up in Canada. Mark, I always love introducing Mark because he's one of the coolest guys I got to meet at Standing Rock, and I loved Mark's frank honesty about the future and where we were at. And there was really like, if you want an honest answer that has love behind it, you would ask Mark, and it was great. And we had there's little moments and stuff, but you really did see for all your stories of I did this in activism and I gave up this and I gave up that. Like when you sit down and you listen to Mark and what he sacrificed, to me, it's always humbling because he had this whole life that was there. He's an educator. He went to school to be an educator, and that's what he did. And he's a magnificent poet. And in the fight for Standing Rock and the fight against the pipeline and to protect the people and to protect the waters, giving all of that stuff up, And it's not something he'll brag about or he'll sit down and say like, I did this. It's like, he probably doesn't want to be talking about it either, but it's one of those things where you have a person who gives their heart and soul to it. And it's always an honor to sit with, and being able to call Mark my brother and my friend, it's just awesome. So if you want to know a little bit more about Mark, that's it. Buy his book. A lot of us valorize Standing Rock. If you've never been to Standing Rock, you've never been to an occupation, you've never been on the front lines, Mark captures some of those moments so well within the book. And you can almost hear when I read it, I can almost hear like, and I wasn't there for a very long time, but I can almost hear and be in those moments again. And it was a very trying time, but it's also a very, very beautiful time as well, because you really did feel alive when you were down there. You really felt like you were doing something. You know, it was great. So that's my pitch, and you should get his book. Is there anything you want to say before we jump into this? Because there's a couple things that we really need to talk about right off the hop.
Yeah. Luta Machapulo, Prahisente Awati, Inawaeki, Joanne Tal, Achib, Atewaeki, Mark Tilsen, Senior Achib. Just my name is Mark Kenneth Tilsen. I'm Oglala Lakota from Porcupine, South Dakota. My mom's Joanne Tall. A lot of my family is from Manderson. We're part of the Oyukpe, the historic Oyukpe and Oyukpe Cha Teoshpais. And there's a reason why we got to mention that. My grandma's Rachel Crow. My great grandma is Bama Mary Shields. On my other side, Ken and Rachel Tilsen were my grandma and grandpa. Yeah, and I'm a poet and educator. A little hand wave. But yeah, I'm ready to jump on in. Colonization. By the way, a preface. One of the reasons why we talk about colonization instead of decolonization is because, like, I don't think we're quite there yet. Like, I think we still need to figure out this whole colonization thing before we can really go to the next step of re-indigenizing, indigenizing, Lakotifying our way of life. The book's called It Ain't Over Till We're Smoking Cigars on the Drill Pad. All right.
I think we even joked about that, writing a book when I was in Standing Rock. And I think that's what you said. I remember you specifically saying that, either in the context of writing, someone's going to write a book or make a movie, or you actually said that we're going to do this, like it's not over until.
Yeah, I was actually asked, but like, you gotta, like, there's different elements of, like, the local folks at Standing Rock were trying to get us to all go back home, like starting all the way in August. And finally, the tribal president asked everyone to leave. And that was Dave Archambault II, who's the tribal president for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. And I was asked by reporters, like, so are you going home? I was like, it ain't over till we're smoking cigars on the drill pad. And the drill pad is the area that built this fortress surrounded by security forces, mercenaries, an entire army of police, like a battalion level strength. And it was just like Tesco walls wrapped in razor wire. And it was like, once we went up there, we win.
We should talk about that day after, but before we jump in, because I do want to introduce myself, my language. When you say mercenaries, is this like hyperbole, or were there actual? There
was a security forces that was founded by a competitor to Blackwater. Blackwater is founded by Eric Prince, and Tiger Swan was founded. God, I can't remember his name, but he was a former Delta Force operator. And at Standing Rock, they were using this counterterrorism, anti-terrorist mentality. And once the Palestinians started showing up in the camp, they're like, they got their hook to market their services. Like, these guys are environmental jihadists, is what they are. And so they labeled our indigenous movement as environmental jihadist in their internal documents, as they're talking to their bosses about us.
And when you say like what so for people who don't know, what is Tiger Swan and what is Black Water? What do they do? What are they known for? What are some of their past accomplishments?
Oh, hold on, I gotta decline something. Both Blackwater and Tiger Swan, they kind of came of fruition. Oh, sorry, someone's just trying to reach me and I don't know how to shut off that feature. Yeah, Tiger Swan and Blackwater kind of came up during the global war on terror after the events of September 11th, and they were used as private security contractors. Blackwater was involved in several massacres over in Iraq, and these different mercenary, I gotta text this person real quick. So,
okay, while you're doing that, I'll introduce myself.
Yeah, please do.
So everyone, okay, Niksukwa, Nistuenako Baksikoi, Nina Anasta, Dichuk na Anasta Sapaki, Naam Nach Six, Mickey Gianni Crazyboy, Mama Gi Baba Derange, Nistu Denisuthine Gi Six Gates at Tapi, Numuchtutu Pikani, Gi Muchkinsis, Gi Lake Athabasca. My name is Gitz Crazyboy. I am Blackfoot. In English, Six Gates at Tapi is what I really am. Six Gates at Tapi in Denisuthine. Six Gates at Tapi on my mom's side, Denisuthine on my dad's side. I was born in Calgary, or Muchkinsis, in Treaty 7 territory, the Blackfoot Confederacy. God's country, as we all know it. I'm also, my communities would be Pikani, and also Fort Chip and Lake Athabasca. But I have other homes too. Like I have some Mohawk friends and family out in Akwesasne and Six Nations, and have some friends and family in Vancouver as well, around that area. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. Yeah, on my dad's side, my dad's side, Dene side, it's Mama and Baba Derange, and then my mother's side, it's Mickey and Annie Crazyboy. And that's just a little bit about me, and that's where my roots come from. Initially, my grandmother came from the States in Browning, Montana, and then she moved up to Gaina, and then she met and got snagged up by this wonderful man, and he moved her to Brockett, which I think at the time and even now is still like the poorest res. And she went from like the best, one of like I think the best Blackfoot res, which is in Browning, and then she kind of just did not to like slander my own community, but like if you're comparing, he kind of took her away from like a really, really nice community to Brockett, which is Pikani, which is, it's home. It's got its comforts. So that's all I could say about it. We don't really got the amenities of like Kainai or Siksika or Browning. We're struggling, but we're trying. So that's just a little about me. So back to Tiger Swan, back to Blackwater.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure what more. What I can tell you though is they used the global war on terror like mentality to really advertise how big and bad a lot of us were, and they tried to keep their surveillance going on a lot of activists as they went back home and spread throughout the entire country. And it was to the point where they were tracking, they sent out infiltrators and paid spies to track different camps and individuals.
And this is all, okay, one more thing just gonna jump into. Wasn't there some like documents that came out recently within this past like 6 months about how they were given a green light to kill like protesters or protectors, I should say? Like it was on, they were like fully willing to commit themselves to going that far.
I think you're mixing that up with South Dakota. Like it's two different protests, DAPL versus KXL, or the KXL1 pipeline.
Gotcha.
The governor of South Dakota, Miss Christine Nome, had authorized the National Guard to shoot to kill and preservation of what they call critical infrastructure projects. At Standing Rock, they're in the internal documents and analysis of Tiger Swan and their other intelligence teams. That wasn't just like one group, but they were working hand in hand with the state governments to protect the pipeline. They believe that if they accidentally or purposely killed some of the water protectors, it would actually stop and end the pipeline. It would endanger the entire project. So their entire strategy, their tactics would shift every like 6 to 10 days, but their overall strategy was to inflict as much violence from the police and mercenaries as possible without actually killing any of us.
That's kind of weird because, like, when you think of Indigenous folks and we see a struggle, and if we see ourselves being like brutally beaten, it kind of like it's almost like a call for us, you know. Violence for most of us doesn't really scare us. The reality of violence, the threat of violence is always there. Whether we're on the front lines, you know, leading something, or we're just going to the fucking store, we know that it's kind of always there for us.
Yeah, like I lost way more relatives during Standing Rock back home on Pine Ridge than we ever lost during the entire course of the pipeline. Like there was murders, suicides, car wrecks, overdoses. I come from a very violent community, and I really thought, yeah. Anyways,
yeah, it's just one of those things. Like intimidation tactics, they think are going to work on us. They don't really do that. You know, it's a part of our everyday world. But like whether we're on the front lines.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too far in the weeds here, but I think when we see us endure violence bravely and we do these really big acts of resistance, it inspires us. It fires it up, saying like, you know, another world is possible as long as we're out there fighting.
Yeah. There's that inspiration. That's us. We see ourselves reflected. Even though, like, my first one was Oka, my first time I ever really got to see it. And I'm not Mohawk, I'm not Haudenosaunee. Although the bears make in Akwesasne make space for me to sit with them. I'm not them, but speak this different language, different ceremonies, protocols. But when I saw them in the face of the Canadian government, the OPP, the oppressors, when I got to see that, I saw myself within them. I knew that they were doing something beautiful, and I felt deeply connected to them. We had the kinship. Whether you're Lakota or Blackfoot, we have that. We're like, fuck, that guy reminds me of my uncle. That reminds me of my auntie. The way she's yelling at those guys to get in line, like, get kind of chills. You're like, I know that. I better like straighten up. I better fucking clean up the house.
Yeah, there was a different Haudenosaunee and Mohawk people that showed up to Standing Rock, and they threw down. Very brave people.
Okay, so I want to get into the convoy because it's happening right now. But before we get into it, you lightly touched on, and this is something we should just jump into because we both have opinions on it. But we're not in the space of decolonization, we're saying, because we're still trying to figure out what colonization really is. So do you want to expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I was tasked with a research project like 10 years ago, and one of the things that we were trying to find out was like, what's the real history of the Sundance on Pine Ridge? And growing up, we'd always hear stories about how there were underground Sundances that were illegal and were at risk of being raided. And then there was, after 1934, there was one large public Sundance that was authorized by the Bureau of Indian Affairs that couldn't have piercing, and they had to have a powwow in rodeo inside the Sundance grounds at night. And
so people who aren't familiar with the Sundance, has that ever happened traditionally? Has that ever practiced where they'd have a Sundance and then in the grounds would they have a rodeo and a powwow?
And it was like, no. And it was just like, it was the only way they were they were officially sanctioned. And it was kind of a way of almost turning it into like a tourist trap, taking something that was meant to be very, very sacred, very like almost, spiritually powerful, very intimate, and then turning it into something tawdry, like we're gonna have a powwow and rodeo. And like, this is no knocking powwows and rodeo, but elevating those social events to the level of sacred, nah, they weren't. At the time, we didn't consider them sacred at all. So it was a way of almost like trying to take down the spiritual power. Anyways, this was all to say is like, as I was researching this, I ran into the official action called the Code of Indian Offenses, which first outlawed the sun dance. And it went through the whole line. Like the whole goal was to stop plural marriages, to increase monogamy. They were specifically said potlatches, giveaways, war dances were specifically banned. And the practice of medicine men was specifically banned. This was the first legal system in the United States. The history in Canada is a little bit earlier, actually, when the sun dances were banned up there. I think ours was in 1876, and I think it was the 1860s in Canada. But it was just amazing to see like how they specifically were targeting every individual piece of Indigenous culture for intentional destruction. By way of creating a legal system designed to suppress our Indigenous way of life. Not sure how many historians we got out there, but if you look at the Code of Indian Offenses, you can draw a line between the Code of Indian Offenses, the resurgence of the ghost dance religion of Jacko Wilson, who is, I think, Ute or Paiute, one of the two, and then the assassination of Sitting Bull, and then the subsequent massacre at Wounded Knee. There's a whole thread. And having the Code of the Indian Offenses legally created the baseline for the police to crack down on Sitting Bull, for there to be a military response, and for there to create the legal justification for the massacre at Wounded Knee. So that's one aspect of colonization, with like, how do we almost like, we have to learn about the history, and like, oh, we know we've heard the story of the massacre of Wounded Knee up until like, done to death, but there's actually specific mechanisms that were enacted to create it. Yeah. Like, did you ever listen to Gord Hill's history of empire, history of colonization?
No. After this, I will.
Yeah, Gord. I first heard him in my early 20s, and he very clearly is saying exploration. What the Western world calls exploration is actually a military recon, and then the next stage of military recon is recon in force, and that's what you see with the missionaries. And then after that, there's an entire trading class that comes in, and and then you see the military conflict of colonization. And what they do is they divide and conquer. Part of the colonization is to create and enact upon enemy tribes that have historic animosities, and then choose one side over the other. Then, like, if the Indigenous people can't be defeated militarily, they wipe out their food source. Again, this is just part of the process. And I think it's very, very similar. But for us in the lower 48, the methodology, that's really interesting. That's a good word. There was a guy, Pratt, who is an Army colonel, I think.
Richard Pratt.
Yeah. And I always talk about Pratt when we're talking about colonization, because he is the perfect transition to saying, all right, the military genocide is going to transition into an educational program, is going to talk about a religious conversion, kill the Indian, save the man. And they actually meant that literally. Like in the Tortugas, they would have people, captured POWs, indigenous men that got deadly sick. And then they were removed from camp, given the best medicine and treatment as possible. And those who lived had their hair cut, were converted to Christianity, and were given Western style clothes and then reintroduced into the camp. So like when we say kill the Indian, save the man, he meant that. That was not a metaphor. That was not a that was not a rhetorical device. That was saying, no, we're actually going to let them die and be resurrected as quote unquote real men.
I should have opened up with this too. Some of the information we're going to be sharing comes from these places, Mark's learning and my learning. And if you're non-Indigenous, you're not from this area, you don't have a nation, you don't have a tribe, you don't have a nation, you don't have people. This doesn't give you any authority at all to speak on behalf of any Indigenous issues whatsoever. All this gives you is a space to just sit. This is the authority you have, is you sit down and you shut the fuck up and you keep your opinions to yourself. Mainly because our mentality and your mentality are two very different things. They've been conditioned throughout different generations. One of the settler or the colonizer or the settler colonial mindset, and us as Indigenous peoples who were in the process of being colonized. Colonization is still going on, and we're still trying to figure these facets out for ourselves. This gives you no authority whatsoever to sit down and think you know something, because you don't. You're still in the process of learning, and you're gonna go through your whole life learning, and you're never gonna really understand. So that's just it. So from this point on, from the beginning until we're done talking, just consider yourself in a very special area where you can just sit and listen. You can ask questions. They're more than welcome to join in, but it doesn't really give you space. Where I want to jump in on this was the oppressor, the colonial mindset being into our people. And the residential schools happened, the forcefully removing us from our own culture. You know, there's different aspects, our language, our ceremonies, all these things had happened north of the border as well. There's a great book called Clearing the Plains by James Daschuk. He was given a Blackfoot name. He actually is really good friends with one of the elders, Mike Bruised, that I seek information and centering in my own life, because he's an amazing individual and he's an amazing elder, and I just can't praise him enough. What I can say though, the oppressor, the colonizer, cannot create solutions to the problems of colonization. I mean, all you got to do is just stop colonizing people. But if you really want a thorough answer, you talk to the people who are there. So you talk to the Six Gitz person or the Six Gitz people, and they'll give you a roadmap. And it'll differ from nation to nation. What works for us might not work for, Mark and his people. What works for his community might not work for other Lakota communities. Every nation will find their own strengths, and they will build themselves out of whatever the fucking holes that colonizers have created for us.
Check this out as an example. Just an example of that is like I work on this philosophy I call Lakota pragmatism, has a way of like breaking, like we have so many different teachings that it's really hard to like synthesize all of them. And you have to put everyone in like historical context. It's like, well, that elder got that teaching from that grandfather who said that in 1930, and he grew up and kind of came of age in the late the early 1900s. So that's where that's coming from. So that might not be the most applicable today, or maybe part of that root is applicable. So anyways, check this out. We have a housing shortage on Pine Ridge of about 5,000 units. Half of our population is under 20 years old. 50% of us we're a young, big ass tribe. And we just got 10,000 more of us enrolled in the past, I think, 13 months. So when it comes to like housing, I was thinking about like a community-based, what we'd call a Tioshpe-based model, and like have a central house and then maybe little tiny homes off of it, or homes that can be expanded upon as more kids are growing up, and maybe even homes that could be lifted and moved around. But a Teoshbre model would only work if you happen to have an intact community and an intact Teoshbre. For some people, because of violence and colonization and all of the attributes of that, some of our communities aren't very strong. Some of our communities, our Teoshbres, don't work or function the way that they were intended to or did, let's say 100, 150 years ago. So even within our own individual, like smaller communities, the solutions aren't going to look the same. Like these folks over here might need apartment buildings and prefab trailers, while these folks over here, shoot, maybe they just need access to hides and some teepees, and people want to live a more decolonized life. Like though, even at our most base levels, our desires and needs are not identical.
So, and this is like one of the most important things for you to think about is when you orient yourself back to your community and your people. And when you're going through your Rolodex of elders and mentors and, brilliant thinkers, we have to address painfully the question of how far along the process have they been colonized? How far along the process have they been brainwashed? Because we have some pretty bomb-ass people who know a lot of songs, a lot of stories, a lot of the history, but they're still praying to a Jesus Christ that, is not us. And then you get people who say like, oh, we all pray to the same God. And that in itself is this kind of this spiritual colonization, because we don't. And you just got it like from the God of the colonizers, they had 10 commandments, and the first 3 commandments are all about one God. And that's not who we pray to as it's the Batapio. It's very clear in their own laws. I can't circumvent their laws by saying, well, they don't really know what they're talking about because we all pray to the same God. No, I'm not going to say that, because I would hate for anybody to say that to me about my Six of Gates to be the beliefs. Like if Mark was to come and say, well, come on, you believe in Wakantanka, you believe in Takashala. I'm like, no, we don't. We believe in different things, and we're allowed to believe in different things.
Yeah.
And our stories and our spiritual stories connect us and validate our existence. So what I'm talking about when I'm saying like how far along the line are they, if they still keep certain aspects of the colonizers' mentality, it will ultimately affect a lot of their choices and their decisions. I'm thankful, though, that these people are still here, because they carry these stories, not for themselves, but for the community. So I can't say I'm fully a decolonial person because I'm speaking English. I'm still learning my language. My beautiful Nitana, my daughter, she speaks more Blackfoot than like I did at her age. And I'm teaching her as I learn. But these certain people are like holding the culture for us. But the next generation hopefully is a little more free. We talk about issues of one last thing. We talk about issues of like monogamy. You brought that up, polygamy. But how does it look like? We say polygamy, you generally think of like that white guy in Utah, that white guy in those families. But it was a different concept that we had as Six of Gates to people. And it's a very different concept than what the Lakota people had. And it's a very different concept when you go from nation to nation to nation. But the idea of polygamy, or even like being in an open relationship, it's different. It's a different context than we have right now. And people who are totally against, like, even are afraid to bring it up, that our people had multiple wives and, had different husbands. They're still wrestling with how beautiful our people were at one time. And there's others who are like, oh, I'm a traditional man, I can have like different wives. It's like, no,
how many of them are you taking care of?
How many can you even fucking take care of yourself?
You take care of one. Let's start with one family. Let's start with one wife and the kid. And then let's go from there.
These are things that we actually need to look at and not be ashamed of and not be afraid of. And we need to really just embrace and retrace ourselves, because what the colonizers put into us, into our mentalities, and shamed us into accepting doesn't work for us. And it hasn't historically worked for us. We had a beautiful system before they got here, a beautiful belief structure before they got here. And when we talk about terms of decolonization, it's everything. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. It's even in your dreams. Like decolonizing in your dreams is hopefully one day dreaming in the language, you know? And like getting to that point where you're living as a healthy community member. And I have like a bunch of like my own fucking internalized traumas that I have, intergenerational traumas. There's still shit that I'm working through. And I'm hoping that less than half gets my daughter's isn't exposed to, you know? But like we said, we come from communities that have high violence, addictions, death. There's things that she's going to experience that aren't indigenous. Like they're having, you know, these high death rates caused by, you know, socioeconomic problems. That's not an indigenous thing. That's not specific. Being poor isn't an indigenous thing. You know, these are things that the colonizers have placed on us, and it's a system that we're in. We're still very much in a place of survival. That's where we are. We're not in a place like, I can tell you right now, the Blackfoot Confederacy is still in a place of survival. We're still underneath the Indian Act. We're still, our self-governance or self-determination has been taken by the Canadian government, by the Liberals and the Conservatives and everybody in between. You know, we're still trying to survive. We have a survival mentality. We haven't been given that space to have self-determination. Sorry, that's all I want to say. I know you want to jump in, Mark.
Also, like people are like, well, what's the solution as the outsiders for us? What can we do? Is like, well, fund an infrastructure project to make sure everybody has clean drinking water, first and foremost. After that, just all of the land back. Just give us all the land back and we'll take care of ourselves and you won't have to worry about it.
And if you come to this idea like, oh, they're just going to treat us as like Indians, we're like, no, we're not fucking terrible people. And how we know we're not terrible people is because the colonizers, those people were genocidal, homicidal maniacs. Okay, so if you follow like the structure of colonizers when they came here and they had a wife and they had a family, some of those men tossed their wives off the ship as they were coming here, so they become single men if they weren't part of a polyamorous like community. That's how they got rid of some of their wives. But when they got here, we took pity on them. We took care of them. We showed them how to live. Like our ancestors saw them and took pity on them. When we are still very much attached to our you know, our structural, like who we are inside, it's not to cause pain to anybody. Unnecessary pain and unnecessary suffering. We're not trying to kill each other off. We could potentially show people a better way to live. In a way, that an economy that's not fucking killing every single plant life, animal life, every sense of species on the planet. We wouldn't show people how to live that life. We would show people how to conserve and just be with others, the biosphere, how to take care of it.
Like just for instance, because of the structure of capitalism and colonization, there's like 30 to 40% of fresh produce and US supermarkets are just thrown out and disposed of while it's still edible. The idea that we don't have enough food to feed people is actually a false idea. We intentionally created artificial surplus, and then because we don't know what to do with the surplus, while maintaining a profit-driven economy, we have to create artificial scarcity from the surplus we created. And it's kind of maddening. Like we have to poison the food and make it inedible, or otherwise people will eat the extra food that isn't deemed profitable. And so first and foremost, just like an indigenous perspective on that would be is you shouldn't lock up the food and food should be used to feed hungry people. What if they don't have money? It's okay to feed people without money. We do it almost every day in every single community, on every single reservation or reserve.
that normalization of poor people, you know, is crazy to me. The normalization that people could go hungry is crazy to me. Because we did have like poor people in our communities, but like there'd be other people around to take care of them. And when you talk about like a pitiful lifestyle, it's like maybe that person doesn't really know how to make blankets or clothes. And there might be something just kind of wrong, like mentally, but you had the community coming in to take care of them. But we've normalized this where it's like that person's pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. That person just needs to stop drinking. And they're just they just need to work harder. Like the whole Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, like just move. Hypothetically speaking, you could just move. You don't like where you're going, quit your job. It's like, no, the system is geared to keep people impoverished and poor, and that's definitely on a spectrum. But we wouldn't have that in our societies, you know. Everybody be working together, and for those that couldn't, there'd be systems in there to help them survive.
Yeah,
and,
like.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, the concept of orphans was really rare historically in our Lakota life. Like the thing about it is, like, there was so many different overlapping families, and like if I was part of a traditional Tioshbai, historic Tioshbai, and my brother dies tragically, I would not be out of place if I married his wife and took their family as part of my own family, and I took care of all of his kids as my own kids. That would be a normal, if not expected, thing for me to do. And also women, like, again, our ability to have very fluid relationships, like when you're young and you have sweetheart relationships and you fall in love, and, you know, I'm gonna go travel with my old lady and her people for a while, and be like, she got sick of me because, I don't know, I snore too much or whatever reason, or maybe I'm just an asshole. So they get you to boot. You find all your stuff outside your lodge one day, and this practice is still done today in Pine Ridge. You can see it on Saturday and Sunday mornings. Young men will come over to their girlfriends, our wives' house, and find all their stuff thrown out on the lawn. It's a traditional and historic practice. You pack up all your belongings in a bag we call the Wachinko bag, which means to be pouting around, and you go back and have that kind of more fluid life. But this is all to say that the concept of an orphan, like a truly abandoned child, was very, very rare. And adoption happened more often when a parent lost a child and they wanted that love and that affection back in their life. They would hunka a child that reminded them of what they lost.
I remember reading, I can't remember, this is a story, I don't know if it was the Lakota people or if it was like the Six of Gates at the B, but these Indians on the prairies were riding, and this fucking white family got scared. So they abandoned their baby, I guess, because it was slowing them down, and they stopped. I don't know if they were doing a raid or whatever, but once they saw a baby, they stopped and they took it in and they brought it back to their community. And even though like its skin color was probably closer to this than this, they just accepted it. This is our child now. And the story could be like, what happened? Like, oh, these fucking white people just like left their baby in the middle of the fields for like anything to eat it. Like, and not even talking about themselves, but for anything. That idea is that we accept people bringing them in, you know. But I just want to like one little quick thing. There's a big shout out to Kelly McGillis. She pointed out, amazing lady, by the way. All right, she's an amazing lady. She's from up here in Mohkinsis. Our leaders are rich by how much they gave.
Yes.
Back to the community, investing back into the community. And if you want to look at it in terms of like economics, stealing horses back into the community, getting a bunch of food back into the community, getting medicines back into the community.
For our Lakota perspective, I would tweak it slightly. Our leaders were rich and wealthy. Good leaders were, because you needed that. The purpose of the wealth was to redistribute it. And a leader who just continuously had absolutely nothing for themselves also never had anything to give. So you would also have to accumulate wealth for the purpose of redistribution. Like if you look at it, it's like physical wealth goes down, but your cultural wealth and the survival of your people goes up.
I'm just learning this too as I get more connected to my Siksikaitz Tipi roots. When we talk about societies and ceremonies, you're gifted, you're transferred something. Could be like a bundle, something sacred from like the beginning of time, like you're given something amazing. For us, it's not the point of holding on to it till you die. You hold on to it there's a set number of years that you would have it, and then you would transfer that back to somebody else. But as you transferred it to them and you gave that up, and even though it's like some things are told, it's like your child, like you're giving something up like that, you're given a lot more respect and you're given a lot more credit. And it's like you're given this abundance of like almost richness from the community. But you now have a role, like you're now this kind of like an elder. Regardless of your age, if you transfer this bundle, you're now at this place where you can take care of people. And the more things people transfer to you, because they see how good how good of a person you are, because you listen to your wife or your wives, you listen to your elders, you take care of the community, you take care of whatever they're giving to you, and you transfer that on, your stature then goes up more and more and more. Not on what you accumulate, but what's also what you transfer on back. And so like, that's a very different viewpoint of like just consuming and hoarding wealth, It's a very different concept. And the concept that we had as Siksikaitz people is so beautiful because it's like, you had it for a while, it has its own journey. Okay, so we had a couple of questions. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about the process of decolonization. I say we're still in it because we're still being colonized.
Yes. I think this is what we wanted to talk. We were eventually going to get talking about too, but like the final stages of colonization are where the colonizer can walk away and the internal process has been internalized on a socioeconomic, political, and spiritual level where we now propagate that own colonization within ourselves, and then unto others we reinforce it.
Yeah, when we're doing it to ourselves. And this could be the whole conversation we have tonight. When I think about that aspect of they just have to walk away and it's now embedded within us, it literally is, I have to baptize my baby. When we pray in our language, we got to kind of throw a little bit of Jesus in there, just sprinkle him on somewhere. It's like, amen. Say the whole thing in Blackfoot, but then just amen. That is a part of the colonization. That's a part of the thing that we need to let go of and free ourselves from. There's so much we can talk about this though, man. It's like one of those things you just keep opening up like a roadmap.
Yeah, like one of the it's one of the things like whenever I meet somebody who thinks of me as a young whippersnapper, even though in like Oglala terms I'm basically an elder because we die so goddamn young. Like kidding, by the way, that was a joke. Not that we don't die, but I'm actually considered an elder. That was the joke. And I meet people who will come and like they want to have this, this verbal sparring, and there are other Indigenous people, sometimes even other Lakota or Dakota people. And they're like, well, I was raised traditional by my elders, my grandmother. And I was like, oh, so by boarding school era folks, you were raised by folks who were coming out of the boarding schools. And that's not knocking them. That's just saying that's where they were coming from. Like my ma helped translate the Bible, do an updated translation of the Bible. Both my grandma Rachel Crow and Mary Shields, they both had family Bibles, big leather-bound things that they carried with them, and loved them some Jesus.
I'm not knocking those that had to survive the residential schools or came out with that programming. They had no choice. And the only way that they could survive the residential schools, is to actually integrate that into their own lives. That was the only way they could survive. There was no half-assing it. When you listen to some of the stories of our aunties and uncles, there's no half-assing it because those goddamn sadistic preachers, those clergy would kill you, or they would kill the people around you to prove a point, or rape them or beat them. So that mentality got into their head. They had to love what was brought in front of them in order for them to survive. One last thing I wanted to say about this is that this comes from Dr. John Henrik Clark, who is he's passed away now. He's a elder of African knowledge, like he's Afrocentric, brilliant. I listened to him and I'm like, man, I wish I could have sat with him at least once. And I wish I could have at least brought him to Blackfoot country to sit and talk about freeing your mind from colonization. One of the things that has always stood out to me is what he said about history. Our view of history has been colonized. The tools in which we go through history have also been colonized. The books that we read and the artists or the authors that we look through their lens, that has been colonized. You give more credit to a person with a PhD who studies Indigenous history written by journals from people who wanted to kill Indians more than you give credit to an Indigenous person who's lived with and who knows the stories, who retains all that knowledge. That those tools themselves have actually been colonized. And those are two things to really think about when you look back at history. So that's all I want to say about that. And if you're cool, we can jump on to the next topic, Mark, but it's up to you. We have also some questions to answer too.
Yeah, no, it's just got me thinking about I remember hearing when I was a kid, one of my uncles I considered the most traditional Lakota man ever. He was a medicine man, and I just thought being a holy person, you'd know the real way to be Lakota, that old school, real Indian stuff. You know what I mean? And he also, had a Harley Davidson and hung out at Sturgis with the Hells Angels. And when I was interviewing his sister, because she had some great old school knowledge, and she was talking about all the teachings that she got as a little girl. And then she was saying, by the time she was a teenager, but then we got busy being Mormons. And I was like, what? Wait, you guys were Mormon? They're like, yeah, we were Mormon for many, many years. I was like, wait, you're the tradition of the tradition. You're the legit of the legit. And you guys were effing Mormon? And they're like, yeah, most Lakota people around here we're Christian. Oh man. And so that was kind of shocking to me. And then it was just it made me realize that that our spirituality, that even that got touched by colonization on a non-conscious level. And in Lakota, we can hear it in our songs. Whenever you hear of but says father and uses wakanthanka as a placeholder for God, you're saying Father God, which is, again, not exactly the most Lakota of concepts. Anyways.
This is great because these are all these things. But if you're Indigenous and you're watching this and you're questioning your own indigeneity, it's fine. Those questions that you ask, how do I reconnect, that is your process of decolonization. You have to find your way back. And there's different pathways back home, back to the ancestors, back to us. And most of it is just freeing yourself from a lot of this colonial garbage. A lot of what you're a spiritual prisoner when you accept the image of their God. And that's just the reality, you just have to free yourself from that, not be ashamed of it. But you're Indigenous. If you're in that process of questioning and wanting to get back,
yeah, you're
Indigenous no matter what the hell it is that you're doing. You're Indigenous on the computer, you're Indigenous playing Warzone, you're Indigenous reading a book,
All those Christian folks who are Lakota Christians, they're still Indigenous. All those Native folks living in a city, that's an Indigenous experience.
And you shouldn't be shamed or feel shame about that. The one thing I do hope that you do is just question, like really begin to question what you've been conditioned generationally from these colonizers and how to break free from all of that and just embrace who we are, just embrace it. So with that, let's get to the let's get to the convoy.
Oh yeah.
The Convoy for Freedom 2022. I want to hear you, because you're from the stateside. I want to hear what you've seen, what your perception on it is.
Outside of you Northerners talking about it on social media, we haven't heard a peep.
So not a big thing in the States.
It doesn't sound like it's that big of a thing up there. Like fewer than like a couple hundred vehicles.
A couple hundred vehicles. It's supposed there were these white folks that are white supremacists, have ties to Islamophobia, homophobia, xenophobia, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous people organized this convoy where they were sick of the government mandates and the overreach, and they wanted their personal freedoms back. Those freedoms. They organized this thing, and so they're going to have like 500,000 truckers. They were going to shut down Canada. Food shelves were going empty because these truckers were dealing with so many mandates.
I did see a meme where it showed the meme said 30,000 semis were lined up as part of the convoy, and it showed photos of like 20.
I think at the most there's probably 130. There was counts that they had done, and there was more actual pickup trucks and cars that were there. But what I found interesting about this specific thing is that they began to try to co-opt Indigenous issues to further their agenda. One of the early things that they did in the beginning was they took a memorial from this elder on the West Coast. And I heard other people say it was like a Cree elder, but I'm not sure. What I think I know is rather it was on the West Coast. There's a memorial from, I think, 3 years ago. And they're all together and they're all singing songs. And what this Convoy for Freedom, somebody had this brilliant idea to take that image and that like a clip and say that these Indians are supporting, this convoy. And you still have Indigenous folks that are like, oh yeah, they're about freedoms, this nation. Like, no, they actually fucking took some sacred memorial for an elder, those songs specifically. Like, it's so crazy. They did that and they put that on their page. And it got shared all around because like, oh, we're all coming together. We're supporting Indigenous issues. These same folks, these same organizers are the ones who are saying like, run over those Indians that are, they're doing a round dance, they're doing a protest. I don't know more, run them over. All lives splatter. All those Indians down in Standing Rock, like you need to just get rid of them and take care of them. They did this other deceptive thing now where we have water issues up in Canada. You have clean water issues down in the res in the States, where they trying to raise like $5 million for clean water to get to Indigenous communities. They've linked themselves into this because they're the only ones, right? Because they're the ones that have all the solutions. There's other groups that are there. They tagged in a group, Water First NGO. This specific organization actually works with these Indigenous communities to try to find unique answers to their unique problems. They got linked in, but they're not working with them at all. They're just like, we're saying we're working with these people. And the organizers are like, well, they haven't really contacted us, but they're raising money. The red flag should be this. Why aren't these, this Convoy for Freedom, why don't they just directly link Water First Nation NGO? Like, that's like one of the biggest things is like, why would you give money to this group who's acting as a middleman rather than going directly to the source? The other major issue with this is that we have the money to fix all of these problems. The money is locked within, it's like the old, what we still normally call is the Indian Affairs. That's governs, it's got a different name now. They change it every few years, but Indian Affairs has more than enough money to provide clean water and infrastructure to these communities if they had an actual plan. I think they get like, I think Pam Palmater was talking about like only half of the money actually makes it out of Indian Affairs to the communities. Half of it stays within the actual, for like training, for salaries, for overhead, for administration. Half that money doesn't make it out. So if you drive by a res, just know that that res is operating at half its capacity.
There was a congressman in the 1970s that proposed taking all of the budget of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and turning it into cash and driving it on the reservations and throwing out bundles so that the money would actually at least get to the res.
And they would actually see it.
Yeah.
The other major issue with like Indian Affairs, and it's I don't know what like the governance structure is like in the States, but with our chief and council, that's not a traditional governance structure. That was one created by the colonizers. Again, colonizers creating a solution for problems that they created. Chief and council they don't have that self-determination over the nation, over the lands. We don't own the lands. We don't own that through the Indian Act. The Indian Act has been enacted since 1876, I believe.
These are what you call the INAC chiefs, right?
Yeah, INAC chiefs. And all they really are, they have the name of chief, but if you really look at the power, all they really are, like talk about the chief and the council, all they really are administrators for whatever policy legislation that Canada wants to railroad through our people. They don't have that final say on their land. They can have some disputes, but they can't say like, we're opening a bank here. We're going to create some buildings here. They have to run through a bunch of different administrations through the actual Canadian government to get the okay on the reservation. We don't own the land that we have in Canada that's held in trust for the Queen and her subjects. That we don't have this kind of stuff. Again, sorry, kind of going a little bit of a tangent on this, but this convoy for freedom has hijacked Indigenous narratives, Indigenous issues to further their own agenda. White supremacists have done this throughout history. Now, I don't like to speak too much because it's not mine to speak on, but if you want something that's kind of a little more mainstream, the slave master picking out a few key slaves to talk, bringing them inside the house, in the attic or in the basement, as Malcolm X would say, spoiling them a little bit so they don't have to have death always present around them, and then getting those people to dissuade any talks of revolution amongst the other slaves, to break that all down. White nationalists have always done this. They've always adopted specific people and used those people to manipulate the others, or they co-opt certain movements, like in DC, painting Black Lives Matter in Black Lives Matter streets fucking solved nothing. But it's a way that they can say like, oh, we did something. It's not authentic. It doesn't change anything. It's a Band-Aid. It's not even a Band-Aid. All it is window dressing. All it is tint. They just put up a window and they tinted it. And behind that window tint is like people still getting beat up by police officers, still being like, all this shit is still happening. That's all this movement has done. And they've historically done it. You're seeing it right now at the convoy.
I'm reminded of a poem, because I'm a poet. It's saying, in the great American Indian story, all of the Indians will be dead. Or no. In the great American Indian story, all of the Indians will be played by white people, and all of the Indians will be ghosts.
Wow. Frozen in time.
Like, it's just like that's kind of like the completion of genocide. The completion of the cultural genocide is one of Sherman Alexie's poems. I forget which one. I don't remember the title before too long. But that's the completion of the genocide, is co-option of our stories. Hannah Arendt, who studied the Jewish Holocaust that the Nazis perpetrated, talked about eventually even like the disappearance of How to Write the Great American Indian. Yeah, that's the one. Hannah Arendt talked about how becoming invisible was one of the final stages of genocide. Like our deaths were taken from us. That even the mass graves could be dug up and destroyed.
And there'd be nothing wrong with doing that.
Yeah.
It's removing the context of who we are. It's like just the erasure of everything, including our context. And so we have a few questions. Morgan Burchell, I don't know if I'm probably butchering your name, has popped up. So do you feel like the colonial forces have gotten more or less fascist in their violence? I would say they have adopted more tactics. Sorry.
I would almost say we need to define what we consider colonial forces.
Mm.
The reason why that, because like if we're talking about like street fascists, yeah, they've gotten more militant and angry and tougher. If we're talking about the culture of colonization, more subtle, way more subtle. And what I mean by more subtle is like we're now being allowed at the very base minimum to partake in some parts of, like, let's say Hollywood or television or documentary film, where like some of our stories are allowed to be told, but in no way, shape, or form are we like Deb Haaland. Deb Haaland is like allegedly one of the most powerful people in the most powerful government that ever existed, and has very actual little say so outside of approving either issues that don't fundamentally matter or issues that are of such low significance. Like we're fighting at like the tail end of genocide and colonization at that level. Like she's removing racist names from certain federal lands and national parks. So which is like, that's good. Does that change the even the short or long-term survival of any indigenous people? It's like, well, it would be hard to say yes to that. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Changing a name doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
You know, like what is effective is the land back. That would be more effective. That would help us a lot. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I like, again, diversity of tactics from the oppressors, from the colonizers. If they're still going to kill you, they're still going to kill you. Like that's just the way it is, you know. It just depends, really. But I don't know. That's a really deep question. The next question she has, I have no idea who this is. Do you consider Charcoal a hero? I have no idea who Charcoal is.
Don't know them.
Don't know. Sorry. I wish I do. If somebody in the chat wants to fill us in like a quick little bio, that'd be great. Next question. Do you want white people to talk about the truth of what we see in ourselves? Yes. This is not me. This is her. Yes. Like the fact we were and are so brutal to our own people. There are still a lot of white people who say the world would be better with 4 or 5 billion less people. So we can just continue exploiting, and their rationality, or the rationale is everyone can be wealthy when they mean white people will be wealthy. So do you want white people to talk about the truth of what we see in ourselves? I mean, you can go first and I'll go after.
I mean, I think there does need to be like one of my friends who is being very, very, very generous to this pretendian named Corinne Grey Cloud, said that, well, there's a market for creating space for white folks to have indigenous attention and an indigenous ear. And I don't think she said it exactly that way, but more like there was a market for it. I personally like the white folks I work and build with, like I'm there for them. They're there for me, friends and family. Culturally and politically, I don't have time or attention for to help white folks process their own colonization and their own colonizerhood. I just don't.
Neither do I. And if I wanted to see the truth of white people, I'll just turn on the TV. I'll watch Netflix, and white history, white identity, white struggle, all of that is right there. You know, even when you're trying to grasp with like, my favorite thing is watching these shows that are written by white people that try to address Black issues, and they always kind of end the same, where it's like the Black guy or Black person. It's usually a Black person makes a statement at the end of the show being like, look, you white people just need to look at us with less hatred in your hearts. And I always wait for it because it's always there. It's always there. Where the next second they're like, and I guess we could be a little easier on white people too. Like there's always that little thing.
There's always that minor note. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, me too.
Yeah. Yeah, because one of the things that we've actually not said is that colonization is a socio-emotional response. That's not what we've said at all, because that's not really what colonization is. It's a history, it's a system, it's an actual military, political, economic agenda that essentially puts the entire world into a series of resources that can be extracted. And those people who traditionally do not have that understanding and actually will stand in defense with the earth and those quote unquote resources, whether they be animals or plants or the land or the air or the water itself, that puts us in opposition. So it's not about, for us, it's not a matter of soul searching. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay, so, man, let's get to pretendings.
Oh, I know.
All right. All right. This is getting good. So let's start off with the most. There's actually a pretend Indian that I have currently in my sights right now. That'll probably be dropped in the next couple of days. Lady from Vancouver. We'll get to that after though. But sad day in Lakota country this past week. You lost a very good woman of the people. She was Lakota and she was Mohawk, and she was really raised with the teachings because of how she spoke. Talk about Corrine Rice, Corrine Greycloud, Corrine
Ostrich, Pereira.
Lost her. She got outed as a pretending with no records back to the people, back to the nation. She claimed to be Mohawk. False. She claimed to be Lakota. False. She fucking claimed to be Blackfoot, and I'm glad I didn't know her. I'm glad I regret not knowing her then because I totally would have called her out back then. But
she used to claim to be viewing Blackfoot, and then gave it up years ago.
Yeah,
but
just wasn't beautiful enough. She just she didn't have that Blackfoot women have. She couldn't fake it.
Okay, actually, she did. She did fake it for years. And no one called her on it. She kind of was introduced to the Indigenous community in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I think that's a really unique community with a lot of relocation kids in San Francisco and in Oakland during what we call the relocation era, where families were relocated to urban areas. And there's history of Indigenous communities and Indigenous resistance in the Bay. And that's where the Alcatraz takeover was. That's where they created, or not the Bay, but about an hour and a half. That's where they created DQ University. That's also where they have the Indigenous Friendship House. And, there's a whole history of people who are living away from home, away from their families and their traditional lands, are kind of just all thrown together. So you meet a lot of people who are like, where are you from? And you only know them from a story. And there's other folks who are second, third generation relocation kids where they're like, well, my grandma's from, but I'm actually living here. And so she came about and was able to thrive in that place of disconnect. And she created a huge following on TikTok, Instagram, as being an influencer and a self-appointed auntie to the masses, to the point she's remember, this is a white woman, or excuse me, mixed race. She's Indonesian and Dutch. And she ended up actually tattooing on her legs Lakota and Mohawk. And still hasn't come clean about not being Lakota or not being Mohawk. She said that
she did that in case she forgot.
She married a Lakota man, and she currently she's pregnant. She's got a baby on the way. So she's going to have a Lakota family for the rest of her life. She was adopted in a hunka ceremony by one of the Labos from Cheyenne River. But the reason why we're talking about this is because this is actually somebody who is weaponizing Indigenous identity for their own wealth. Like, again, whenever we're talking about like the purpose of wealth is redistribution, this is the inverse model. This is somebody who I just can't imagine this, but like pretending to be native in order to soak up clout, attention, love, and financial resources and access. Again, there's, Indigenous communities, there's very few people who have full access to a wide range of spaces that are like conventionally, that's part of the mainstream, or not even part of the mainstream, but like where they're allowed to, to thrive as Indigenous people. And the very fact, just like she straight up claims Pine Ridge, like my home. And I was like, I never heard of her before. I'm not saying I know all 40,000 Oglalas. I'm not saying that. But, if you ask around, like back home, I'm usually known as like Nick Tilsen's little brother. So we're like, oh, what's that Mark Tilsen cat? No, not the one whose grandpa was a lawyer, the other one. And they're like, oh, well, Mark teaches over at Red Cloud. Mark used to teach over at Red Cloud Indian School. He was at Standing Rock. He was the guy with the orange coat and the fucking furry hair. And so like we become known quantities, and we're easy. Lakota people are easy to fucking track down about which communities that you're actually from. Like I was born in the old hospital of Pine Ridge. My mom's family all grew up in Manderson. I came up in Porcupine. And like, you'll know about which community, like, where'd you used to work? Where'd you used to be? Who'd you used to date? And our reputations always precede us. I
gotta jump in. So when you're ceremonial world, I got to meet some sun dancers from Mark's area. Six of Gates at the P, Southern Alberta, Montana, South Dakota. And I was like, oh yeah, I met this really cool guy at Standing Rock. His name's Mark Tilsen. Like, oh, and this is word for word. Can't remember her name. I think it was Alberta Miller, Jim Miller's wife. And she's like, oh, yes. He's that atheist that goes to Sundance. and she's like, hey, he's a funny guy. He when he was younger, he used to hitchhike everywhere.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That was and this is the Moxon Telegraph, this is how we it was just one little word, and it wasn't even, she didn't say Nick's brother. It's the atheist that goes to Sundance, and he used to hitchhike everywhere when he was younger.
I actually, for a couple of summers, I pretended to be a German tourist because I had this Austrian like parachute backpack, and I used to pretend to be a German tourist on the res. And then there was like, I actually got picked up by one of my relatives. He was like, oh yeah, I was hanging out with this German tourist, man. Gave him a ride all the way from Overpass Sharps all the way over to Porcupine Butte. And then he was like, what's funny is I was asking around about you. And I was like, oh yeah? And he was like, nobody's heard of you. What is it, Hans? But they say you look a lot like Joanne Tall's boy. And I was like, fuck. It was like, are you? And it was like, are you really hitchhiking all over the res pretending to be a German tourist just to fuck with people? I was like, yeah, that's for my own amusement.
And that shit will follow you wherever you go. I have to say this.
I absolutely forgot about that because that was like a lifetime ago. That's my reputation. The atheist who goes to Sundance, who used to hitchhike everywhere.
And this, like, I say this because when we identify who we are or our families, we have these things that follow us. I had an uncle. He's still alive, thank God. He got sick. We all thought it was COVID. wasn't COVID. He's just fucking lucky. I still pray that he's like, and my uncles, aunties, they all kind of get through this. But he used to call himself, and people knew him as the Prince of the North in ceremony. I mean, that's cool. And people would say like, "Oh, royalty, that's royalty. Yeah, royalty is we're gonna be sitting in ceremony." Like, that's cool. That's my uncle, you know. And I asked him like, why? And his story was there was these white people, and he said, "Where are you from?" And they're like, "Oh, you know, I'm Cherokee." And whenever we fucking hear this, it's always great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess. So he told me he heard princess. He's like, "Oh yeah, we have royalty up north. I'm the Prince of the North," is what he said. Flash forward a few years later, and I think I'm sitting in ceremony with these Lakota guys. Can't remember. They might have been Cree. I never seen them before. And like, "Who are you?" It's like, "Oh, I said my name, my last name." Like, "Oh, is your uncle so-and-so?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh yeah, the Prince of the North." And I was like, "Yeah, when did you last see him?" Like, "Oh, back in like the 70s or 80s or when." I was like, "Where?" And they're like, "Oh, down in South Dakota. Came to a meeting down there." I'm like, "Oh, what happened?" There was a woman. There was a really beautiful woman. And he grabbed a 303 that somebody had at the house, and he went outside and he shot off two shots before the ceremony started. And he took those shells and he put them on his ends of his braids. And then he was singing. And when he was singing, he would swoosh his braids so they would cling. And then at the end, when he was introducing himself, he's like, "Oh yeah, my name's so-and-so. I'm the Prince of the North." And then they all started laughing because after the ceremony was done, there was another man who actually liked that woman. And then these two, my uncle and this guy, got into like a fist fight right after the ceremony was done over this woman who then left and didn't give either of them time of the day. But that's the 70s. And this name followed into the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010s. So you could track this stuff down. So when we do our own like background checks, it's there. We can go right back to the 70s, the 60s, the 50s. We can go back to who taught you, who taught your teacher, like where they got certain songs, when they fucked up in their life, who they like, kids they don't take care of. Yeah, we can do all these background checks. These pretend Indians, they just come in and they think they can fake all this shit.
Yeah, and like if you like, I don't like. There's a certain way that like white folks attempt to harmonize Lakota songs, and like a very like Euro pentameter, and I can't really describe it, but it's like super sing-songy and.
I would say garbage.
Yeah, I mean it's offensive. It's actually offensive to the ear, but like the opposite, like the opposite is true. Like I can hear, and I was like, well, shit, you sound like one of my nephews. I wonder if one of my uncles taught you. Learned that from one of the singers that one of my uncles knew from. Or like, oh man, you must have learned that from the OLC tapes Uncle John was singing that, because nobody sings that way anymore, but you do. So you must be like a neo-traditionalist who's like rocking from those old tapes. And so it's like you can follow, like if you get a sharp enough ear, you can follow the songs. And then you can just hear people who are like, I don't know who taught you that. It sounds a little off key. I think the message to pretendians is like, you're gonna get found out. And this isn't to knock people who are attempting to reconnect to their land. Like Kareen says, "Oh, I should have identified myself as a descendant rather than enrolled." I was like, nobody gives a shit about enrolled. People care about who your family is. Are you actually from the place that you say you are?
But they're also like, there's Kelly had brought this up, and we need to fucking talk about it. How vile these people are. You know, like some people say like, oh, they're crazy. I used to say that, but no, I see them as vile, soulless opportunists. And I'll go so far to say this about her, is that she had a surgery done so she couldn't have babies. And that's like your own choice, you know. It's a painful thing to do. It's a painful place to be. And then she had the surgery done. But then she met this dude and she wanted to get the surgery undone. So she put a call out. And this time she was still anti of all the other people. And so she did the fundraiser or like a GoFundMe to get this surgery reversed so she could have babies again. And like,
is that real? Like, do you seen documentation on that?
So this is like the story that's going around. And like the only caveat that is there is that there's another Lakota baby coming into the world, if this is true. But like a lot of people are saying it. If you could find it, Kelly, and then put it, I don't know if it's over there on the screen or if it's over there on the chat box. But if you could provide a link or some receipts, that'd be great. But this is like, well, I just want to say this. I don't know if it's true or not, but what I do want to say is that when they get to these positions, they then become gatekeepers for opportunity for other Indigenous folks, or they take those opportunities away. They then become the expert. They then can validate a person coming into a position or a job, or they can totally invalidate them. And these people are fucking fake themselves, you know? But that's a really dangerous thing to think about as a gatekeeping. But go ahead, Mark.
No, somebody asked me, is it predatory behavior? And it didn't ask me. It was a question that one of my relatives put out on social media. Is like, are these pretendians actual predators? And I was like, well, I know like the pretendian men I've known in my life are almost universally abusers. Like physically violent. There's one of my good friends had a husband, had kids with them, and he was incredibly violent to her and spiritually manipulative and like financially abusive, like just kind of like messed up her whole life. There's that story of that really cheesy motherfucker who was exploiting Standing Rock, Red Pope Wolf, who turned out to not be Indigenous at all, but was a sexual predator. And like in those cases, it's like literally non-native people like wearing the camouflage, like where, you know, do you ever notice it's the most over the top, the more Indian than thou, the super pretentious, like self-righteous, self-serious. It's never like an old timer who's working the gas stations who's like, hey, come here. You know, I'm secretly Apache. And then like, that's just it. And he drops it and goes about his life. Like that's not, it's never those folks that turn out to be like the pretendian exploiters. You know what I mean? It's always like the most Wakanda thou people. Watch out for the hats and the cheesy ass jewelry.
Those are the tells. Sometimes like the names are tells for us too. Like we just know you're fucking stupid moonbeam child running through the glades of paradise spirit realm. Like
over the top names.
I hate you automatically. I hate your guts. I don't want you to speak around me. I don't even want you in the same space. I don't even want to share food with you. And I hate the fact that you might be at a ceremony with me and you're saying all this shit. I'm like, oh my God, I have to.
What if the people I like you? Ooh, you're gonna get it. I'm gonna punch you in the spirit world. I hope there's a spirit world because I'm gonna punch you there.
Okay, so
like Autumn Eagle Shield. I'm just like thinking of all the Eagle Shields I know and trying to think how they're related. Like down in the comment section, like, yeah, that's how the brain works.
Oh no, that's is it Eagle Speaker or Eagle Shield?
I thought it was Eagle Shield.
Eagle Speaker is they're Blackfoot. They're from here, but we all know though. That's the thing is that we all know.
Right.
Okay. So when we look at there's a couple questions about. Here's one that popped up. Do you consider people with Indigenous ancestry generations back and no real Indigenous cultural experience pretendians? So if I'm reading this correctly, sorry. If I'm reading this correctly, I believe you're saying somebody from like your great 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 grandma or grandpa was an Indian. I'm going to say Indian, and then you, all these generations later, European, outside of Canada, outside of North America, outside of Central America, outside of South America. Then there's you. You consider those pretendians?
No, I would consider those people who have an indigenous ancestor, which is different. Whether or not, so check this. Most of those folks, if they position themselves, again, it's about what is your relationship to your people, to your community? Like, I know a person who I've met online and I ended up kind of loathing, and they're like, oh, I can't get enrolled on Pine Ridge because my grandma wasn't enrolled. And I was like, all right, that really, again, enrollment doesn't really matter. Like, who's your family? Do they claim you? And like, even when you already have to going through that whole question of like, who claims you and who doesn't, it's kind of already sus right then and there. Like, sometimes I probably have a relative or two who don't want to claim me because I act out of place sometimes and I talk a lot of smack. No fault of them for my behavior.
But they would still acknowledge you though.
Mostly.
Yeah, probably. That's my fucking cousin. You could like with us. Yeah. We'll give you the auntie that likes us.
You hear a lot of fucking Mark. Yeah. And you'd get the acknowledgement like, fuck that guy.
Oh, we can give you the auntie that likes us. We give you the auntie that doesn't like us.
Yeah. I'm still tight with that cousin. Go talk to that good traditional cousin over there who's still on their good graces. But yeah, no, I think the pretendian is the person who manufactures it. And I think if you're talking about a descendant who doesn't carry themselves, like, all right, let's say, like, this is a weird thing, but let's say Karen was actually Oglala Lakota from Pine Ridge. It's real simple. Go back home and be with your relatives. Connect to your community. Work in your community. That's it. Like, you know, I spent a lot of my childhood not growing up on the res. The first years of my life, I spent on Pine Ridge in my little Oglala heaven. I thought I lived in the best of all possible worlds, down the road from Keeley Radio. And I went, like, you know, most of us don't live on reservations. So it's about going back home. Are we talking about?
No, we're not talking about Carrie. That's a totally other different pretendian who got find out. This applies to all of them though.
Yeah.
So can I just add? All right.
Yeah.
My great grandpa, maybe even greater than him, was Japanese on my dad's side. And he was a good man. And they brought him into the community and he had kids. And lo and behold, generationally, here I am. I don't consider myself Japanese. I think it'd be pretty fucked up if I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally Japanese. And all I based that on was stereotypes from movies, because that's all these fucking people do. Like, oh yeah, I'm the same lineage of those people from Princess Mononoke. You know, Ashitaka? We're the same clan. Like, it's so fucking bizarre to me. I could say that's part of my lineage, like it's part of my history, but I don't know a goddamn thing about it. I don't know who his family is. I don't know where he came from. I don't know any of these things, but I'm sure if I found out his name, and I was really, really interested in that, I could go back to that part of Japan and be like, yeah, this is my great grandfather. And they'll probably be like, cool. When are you going home?
Yeah. I think the exception of that is actually the Irish. Like whenever like there's more Irish people of Irish descent living in America than there are Irish folks living in Ireland. And as an Irish American, if you were to go to Ireland, they would say, welcome home.
Yeah.
I actually think that's a beautiful movement of like people connecting to their like European roots. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most powerful and beautiful experiences you can have is someone tell you, welcome home.
Another text. If somebody came to me and said my great grandmother was Blackfoot, I would say like, cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you're white.
Now I don't have no trust about nothing. Like, you know, I come by this like the redness in my beard. Honestly, there's a descendant. Was it Nick or Anton Janice, who I think was from the Bordeaux region of France, who started off as a fur trapper. I could trace my lineage all the way to France, but maybe I'll even learn, but I'm not a Frenchman.
And it's a weird fucking thing to claim. I don't, just out of respect, like, I'll be truthful. I don't give a shit. A lot of us don't now. Like, we've given credence enough for the past couple decades to somebody who had some ancestor way back when. I don't care. I don't care. I'm never going to care. There's not going to be a moment from this day for the last like year from now till like I die that I'm ever going to give a shit that your great grandpa was a descendant of Crazy Horse, or a descendant of Sitting Bull, or a descendant of like some Cherokee princess or some Blackfoot. I don't give a shit. And I'm not ever going to care because it's not a part of your actual reality. It's not really who you are. And it might be cool. Sorry, it might be cool with you and your friends. You sit around, your white friends, like, oh yeah, none of us give a shit. Like, none of us really care. You're not there with us. So like, I don't know. I don't care.
And then it's like, what exactly is the purpose of you telling me that? What do you expect to gain? Because it sounds like, even by asking the questions, like, it sounds like the people like want that Indigenous identity to incorporate into their reality, into their political, economic, and spiritual lives. And that feels really exploitive.
And we're not going to teach you the super secret Indian handshake that we all do when all the white people leave the room. We have one.
That EDU, just buy the tapes, cry, pretend you're tradish. Sorry, that was terrible advice. Don't do that.
So we have a couple more. Okay, so from Alana Koskov. Okay, so, oh yeah, actually, we'll get to this after Sonia about people who are forced to assimilate. Actually, let's talk about that right now. I'll say my piece, then I gotta use the washroom. I'll be right back. If you say to me, my mom, my grandma, or like my great grandma were adopted, or yourself, that's fucking totally fine. That's colonization, and that's enough for me. Like, I'm not going to sit there and fucking blast you because of an external colonial process that's meant to destroy Indigenous identity and people from their Indigenous identity. I'm not going to fucking, call foul or make a person feel bad because of that. But you have to be authentic in that. Because if you say that and you're a lying piece of shit, I fucking hate your guts. And I'm probably going to tell everybody, this fucking person over here is a liar. They use that painful process of people being taken from their homes. And I'm pretty sure this is true with Mark, but I know this is in my own family history, is I can remember the certain summers or falls or winters where our cousins just weren't there. And our aunties or uncles went on a big fucking bender and might have been in jail. But we remember those times when our cousins were gone. And we remember, hopefully, like, there's sometimes where they come back, or sometimes I don't see them until we're like older. But we remember those days, and those fucking days are painful and those days are sacred. And if you're a piece of shit out there that's going to utilize that space of unknowing for your own like clout, like fuck you. I hate your guts already. It's up to you now. Floor is yours. I'll be right back.
All right. Yeah. I think, I just want to echo Gitz Crazyboy, Mr. Deranger said. Like, being attacked and having our kids removed from our families is part of the Indigenous experience. The Indian Child Welfare Act is being chipped away intentionally by some of the same lobbyist groups that are creating and fighting for these critical infrastructure bills and anti-protest bills in Texas and in Louisiana. And most, or not, a lot of, I should say, a lot of radicals, Indigenous and otherwise, are targeted by Child Protective Services to have their kids taken away from them. And it's another level of state repression and harassment. So being targeted and removed from families is part of our Indigenous experience as we're battling colonization. And again, like I had aunties and relatives who were part of the relocation era who didn't grow up on the res, didn't grow up feeling particularly connected to their indigeneity until they did the work of finding down their family and reconnecting.
Right. We got, okay, so Alana Cosgrove, as more and more people, perpetrators of settler colonialism, start to prioritize Indigenous knowledge, sovereignty, and land back, how do you envision this process taking place respectfully, where white people do not just demand more in a new form of Indigenous communities? It seems like there's a beginning of a cultural shift of learning, though I worry about it turning extractive in just a new way, especially in regards to traditional ecological knowledge in the climate crisis. So
excellent point. I think that when I say land back, I kind of mean that in the most literal of all possible ways. There are movements to create like either rent, like a way to pay back Indigenous communities through an additional layer of rent or a tax that could eventually be used to buy and purchase more land, or just to help Indigenous people survive. I think that with stuff like what we're doing here, like we're dropping knowledge, and most of it, like I don't feel like we're dropping particularly sacred knowledge. I hope not, anyway. I was like, of all the Lakota songs I know, did I sing any or perform any from them for you? Did I teach you how to do a ceremony? No. Okay, how sensitive I am about this stuff now is if I have white folks and they ask me how to smudge, I don't even tell them that anymore. Because I end up part of some white folks' story was like, well, my Lakota friend from Pine Ridge, you got to say it incorrectly so they know you're not from there. My Lakota friend from Pine Ridge taught me how to smudge and taught me how to use this sacred medicine. I was like, I thought I was trying to help out a friend, and now I'm part of this story of exploitation of traditional knowledge. So like helping mutual aid networks of Indigenous people who are struggling, boom. Helping out our political causes, boom. Amplifying our voices online, offline. And if you're the type of person who's fortunate enough to partake in the colonial project, to be a landowner, spend time. Like if it takes years, think about doing an estate return to Indigenous land. Like what would it be like to return your property into Indigenous hands? But colonization's tricky. Like when Gitz and I say like we don't really have time or attention for like to help white folks process, that creates a market for some person who wants to manage that energy, attention, and resources to step in. So colonization is tricky, and there will people who will learn how to adapt. And like, again, as we see with land, this is one of the reasons why land acknowledgements now have an asterisk next to them, because liberals co-opted that in such a way that it was like, we're not going to do anything other than the land acknowledgement. I was like, okay, that's a start, but it's never meant to be the be all. It's always meant to be just the beginning. Yeah. Sorry, I rambled a little bit.
That's fine. There's been a couple of times in my process of like of life where I've done smudges and I skipped white people. And I don't really feel bad about it. You know, it just really depends on me in the moment. And I'm not like the intercessor of all medicines, but there are times where I get this really weird feeling. And a lot of it comes from like my own self-defense of like cultural practices where I really get the jitters from some people about like them weaponizing it. Mark talked about how it becomes a part of their story, but then as I did at the beginning of this talk, feeling that they now have authority, a moral authority to say anything to Indigenous peoples about our practices, our ways of life, especially when they come into like ceremony for a while and they're like, oh, you guys aren't doing that right.
Oh my God. Like Standing Rock totally accelerated this process. Like one of the uncles spawned like 12 or 20 different sweat lodges, and it's mostly white people that are running them. And I was like, feels terribly counterproductive. And then there's some of the bros who were like introducing people into the Deer Clan. And like Lakota people we have Teosprays, and societies. We don't have clan structures like that. So there's people who are like, I'm Deer Clan out of Standing Rock. And I was like, dude, that was some Anishinaabe guys from fucking Red Lake just messing with you. And you're not part of any Deer Clan. And they're just walking around with nonsense in their heads. And by the way, this happened historically. Like there's, if you ever read some of the stuff that's done about Lakota like teachings, sacred versus secret, there's some Lakota people who would just lie to anthropologists for fun and profit. So it's not even like currently we're having teachings going out in an exploitive, strange manner that was never meant to be taken seriously. We have this historically. And then some people would lie to anthropologists simply because like, if I give this guy real teachings, he's going to go mess with this sacred power anyways. And that's no good for nobody. So I'll just lie to him and make up as much nice sounding nonsense as possible. And he's going to pay me anyway. And he's not going to know any different. Bunch of anthropologists, meanwhile, 100 years later, have incorporated that as the traditional way of being.
I've written papers, have gotten their own doctorates,
made whole
their own careers. It's all bullshit.
And we just hope our ancestors are looking down at us and laughing.
Yeah, I like there's a thing where there's a dangerous line that I'm always cognizant of where we become, even the process of like skipping a white dude or because they got the jitters. That's fully within my ability to do that. Like I someone's gonna give me shit about it. I'm like, no, man, there's just something, there's just something about the way that they talk or the way they act or the things that they're saying that are bring up all these red flags for me. And we have that ability to do that. The problem becomes when we become elitists ourselves, amongst ourselves, which we get into.
Like the actual more spiritual than thou folks.
Yeah, and that's dangerous grounds to get on, and we'll talk about that in cultural, lateral violence in just a moment. But that if that happens to you where you're like in a ceremony, and we don't do this on accident. So if we're talking about going to ceremony and you're there and we purposely don't fucking tell you or we don't invite you, that's not an accident. And just take it as a teaching that we're still warming up to you or you're giving us this weird fucking vibe. And your process of the settler colonial mentality on understanding ceremonies is probably dangerous. And you have to come to terms with that. You could like try to, come from this really loving place, but we see it and identify it. And there's a reason why we're not asking you to come to ceremony with us. you know, and it's not for you to say like, well, you can invite me. It's like, fuck, what are the things you need to work on? You know?
Yeah, like I think like there's like you know, a couple hundred years of passage of time that needs to happen before it's like, all right, white folks, we're at a place now where we feel okay giving our spiritual energy and teachings unto you, you know, without it feeling, you know, extractive or exploitive. Like, I'm the first generation in my family who grew up without the ceremonies outlawed for like 100 years.
This is great. I love this. This is so awesome. I just love like your dissection of this. You know, you're really thorough. It's not like it's very thorough process. And for us to even talk about some of this stuff is kind of painful to bring up, you know, because we do know of people who come to the ceremonies and they kind of create their own mythology and then they walk away as an authority. And there's a specific Sundance in the Bloods where they have a lot of white folk that come in there. And I've sat with a couple of them. And I know your eyes are going to roll all the way back to Pine Ridge on this one. We have our own Blackfoot Sundance, Lakota. It's different. Happens during the same time. It's completely 100% like different. And then there's the Dakota style Sundance. Okay? With the center tree and the rounds and the 4 days and all of the things, the elements that come from your people and that first original Sundance. But you have folks who come into the Sundance and I don't know if they just fucking check out while they're in there and they're missing the teachings, but they leave. And I've heard a few of them say this to me. They leave thinking that that Sundance came from our people. Okay. That's like they leave with this. And then the other is that they brought that Sundance back to the Blackfoot people. And neither of those statements are true. And these are people who go to the ceremony and they have pipe and they come back out and it's like, man, I don't know how to tell this person that they're entirely wrong. And I wish that they would just kind of go back in and sit down and like, I don't know what happens to certain people when they're not listening, but like, there's this danger that we're constantly having to have when we have outsiders coming in that only come in for the ceremony and then they go back home and they never return any kind of love to the community or the family. That's extractive to me.
I know what you mean. And like, we like, you know, there's a lot of empathy in what they would call Hochoka on Pine Ridge, where there's like spiritual pilgrimage every year because it's like, oh, that tribe lost their way. Oh, that tribe lost their Sundance. Oh, these people don't feel comfortable dancing over there, but they feel comfortable and love dancing over here. So even though they only show up a day or two ahead of time, it's all okay. Meanwhile, this family has been carrying this burden throughout the entire year. And it's only a handful of the boys and the local crew who gets everything ready for them. And like, and then they have to take it all down afterwards. And it's like, well, are we doing, at what point are we doing spiritual tourism here, guys?
And they have, they're on E, you know, they have barely enough gas to get there. They have barely enough gas for the chainsaws. They have barely enough anything. And these people come in and then they leave. I get that. But I also get how cool it is when you go to another nation, a neighboring nation, and you're welcomed in and people treat you like family. You know, that's like one of the best things about our ceremony is how we feel when we're accepted. And like you have to work hard though. Like that's the thing. You can't just go in there. You could put your feet up, but when you go in there and you work hard and you carry yourself really great, and when people accept you, it's the fucking best feeling in the entire world, you know? But you have to be giving something back. There has to be this give and take. There's a reciprocation back to the community, back to the family. It has to be there.
I was just wondering about how you feeling on time. I don't want to take up any more people's time than.
Let's just go all night. Fuck it. What do you want to cap it at? What should we do? Because we have a couple more questions to go through.
All right, let's go through the questions.
Okay. Okay, so this one, you wouldn't know him. His name's Pat King. He's one of the organizers. Pat King claims to be part Indigenous. He got some Indigenous folks for his freedom rally that he did in Edmonton, got some teepees, some elders out, left everybody fucking hanging at the end, where they couldn't even find the teepee. But here's why I don't believe Pat King is Indigenous, is he has Twitter, he decided to upload some videos to Twitter or whatever, where he openly talks about white blood purity. And so your card, your Indigenous card, whatever you're trying to fucking play, immediately dissolves. It's gone.
I ran into a handful of not just like internalized colonized people, but in like actual white supremacists, Indigenous white supremacists. Some of the strangest, most lost people I've ever met in my fucking life. Like, yeah, I don't know anything more than about that.
He also said that if you're born here, you're Indigenous.
Oh yeah, that's this other thing.
Semantic argument.
It's also like giving us no ground to retreat to. It's like, oh, we're not Indian, we're not American Indian. We can't just say Native. And then like there's people who are like, well, if you're Indigenous, you have to include all these other people, and we're left with nothing to mean us. We're left with nothing left to mean us from here, because everyone else wants to pick it apart.
Yeah, no, it just sees a semantic little argument to get themselves included. That's it. It's just empty. Just an empty statement that doesn't mean anything aside from him and other white supremacists. Just to erase the people that were already there. So that's that. Do you feel like the white? There's like 4 questions. Do you feel like the white nationalists are using fraudulent documents provided to Indigenous elders to erode the fact Indigenous peoples were pretty honest from the very beginning until colonialism showed how lying works in white systems?
I feel like they're referencing something very specific that I don't know.
I would just say that they've always been liars.
What I will say, one comment on that is that there's people who consider the treaties to be sacred because it was the first and last time they treated us as equals. And I was like, I've heard that argument, but it doesn't make sense to me. It's like on the battlefield, after you utterly whoop and rout a cavalry unit, they'll learn to respect you. They'll treat you a little bit more on an equal footing after that, after you decimate them a bit, bloody the nose. But documentation, as I was talking about, like the Code of Indian Offenses is a way, and the treaties are a way of creating a false sense of truth that will later be betrayed and turned into a lie as a tool of colonization. And so when we say white supremacist, I think we mean colonizer, but unless you're referencing something more specific and recent.
I have no idea what she's talking about either. So next question. What white people are not vile, vulgar opportunists? As a white person, it seems like someone's going to cut this of me saying this and put it online as if I'm actually saying it.
It's about to get canceled. They're all a bunch of vile little toy soldiers in a miniature dirt world.
So I'm just, this is the question that Morgan posed. As a white person, it sure seems that the nature of capitalist indoctrination and heightened after 1493. Well, I just want to jump in on this. No, it did not heighten in 1493 because they were doing it to themselves. But then if you were to look at one specific continent that Europe has discovered, forgotten, rediscovered over and over again, it'd be Africa. There's several time periods where they went in, forgot about them, forgot about them. So no, it's just a history thing. I wouldn't say it heightened. It might have been in one of the peaks, but You look at like Central and South America, any other nation prior to the 1493, ones that they completely annihilated. Yeah. But I don't think all white people are vile, vulgar opportunists, if that's what you're asking. Because the question is, what white people are not vile, vulgar opportunists? Anything to add?
Still not quite understanding, but yeah.
Okay, let's get to the next one. What are your thoughts, Mark? What are your thoughts on indigenization being Christianized?
You can kind of infer that. I think though what's kind of interesting is when like Christianity is like I was about to say like indigenized, but it's almost like, I was explicitly told by a very beloved priest on Pine Ridge that he talked to traditional elders and says that there is no conflict between the teachings of the Bible and the teachings of the pipe. And it was like, we literally have different creation stories. Our spirit, I really wish there was as a young man, I kind of fantasized that like, I wish that Fool's Crow or Black Elk was still alive and we could go out to the Black Hills or the edge of the Badlands and have a real traditional ceremony and we'd learn the old way. I think that until you come through a full process of like, there are some ceremonies that allow you access to truth that's like has to do with more of natural law. Like in Lakota, we would say like not any of the collective ones really, because you're going to be dealing with the collective colonization. I think it has to be an individual process of, like the Humblecha, the Vision Quest. I think that is maybe a way out. The other is, oddly enough, by introducing and borrowing hallucinogens from other tribes. The colonization process, as we internalize it, is not an intellectual process, but a spiritual, emotional one, as it becomes internalized. When I was talking about the externalization, where it isn't, it's an actual economic, policy-driven mechanism. I'm kind of leaning on a little bit of Vine Deloria and his hopes for the Native American church. But I think that most of us who grew up going to ceremony would never consider them Christian in any way, shape, or form. There are the Christian ways, which are fine, because we're taught that, and we're not taught to judge or look down on Christians. But we're never taught that colonization ended up inside our heads as part of our spiritual teachings. That's never, like when I was a kid, we didn't talk about that. That wasn't what was given to us. Our teachings were about, prayer and belief. Sorry.
Oh, it's good. The Christianity and I want to make a bold statement and say every Indigenous nation, but I can't because I haven't been to every Indigenous nation. I don't really know them that well. But I'll say this for the Six Gates at the T, and I'll say for the Mohawk because I spent enough time with them. The Haudenosaunee is that they're diametrically opposed. Ask any real Six Gates at the Elder about our connection to the world, and they'll say we're a part of it. We don't have dominion over it. We don't have dominion over all things. Like it's not our belief structure. And there is this proprietary ownership that men have over women in the Bible. They talk about, the rib coming from Adam, and then there's a whole thing about like men having dominance over women. That's not a Six of Gates at the philosophy. That's not a practice or way of life. And that's a good way to get divorced if you're six of gates to be traditional man, like no one would want to marry you. No one would want to marry you. You know, they'd have to arrange a marriage, and that fucking woman would leave you too, because they wouldn't have that. When, again, I said this before, and this is echoing the words of Dr. John Henrik Clarke, you know, when you accept the image of God from the colonizers, you become a spiritual prisoner, you know? And then when we start changing certain things, even the way we pray in our languages, it begins to change our concept of reality. So saying, you know, praying to the creator or praying to creation is way fucking different, or acknowledging creation is way fucking different than praying to Father God, because then you start looking at the males as the archetype for God, and we're not. You know, we might be like, they may have aspects of gods and goddesses in all of us, but that begins this almost like a cascade effect going down, because if Father God is at the very top, then where does that bring woman? And to say that, like, oh, well, they're Mother Earth, it's like, it ties together. Like, well, who created Mother Earth? You know, like who's above that being? And like, when the more I hear stories, the more I hear that everything is intricately related to one another, and that there's not one thing that's higher or lower than the other, but everything is working together. And when this hierarchy begins to form, that's when all the chaos started to come out. You know, that's when, that's for our Blackfoot histories and our stories of the snakes. When this hierarchy began to form, then the chaos came from it. So I don't know. Is there anything you want to add to that, Mark?
Yeah, I would just have to say, like, in Native American church, like, there's two main ceremonies. Giving away some secrets here. There's, you know, the half moon, and then there's the crossfire. Crossfire is where scripture is actually read aloud as part of the ceremony. And in the half moon, in the songs, they explicitly say grandfather God. And I think these modalities got formalized at a time where our ways were still outlawed. So in a lot of ways, the peyote religion, the peyote ways, came into being as a way for colonized people to connect and reconnect to their own spirituality. But again, some of that colonization, kind of recognizing where you're at, it feels intentionally like it has these colonized phrases and understandings and notions of God built already in to the spirituality itself.
So good. I love getting into this. I'm so glad you asked this question. If I could add one more thing, I would say that the reason we don't look to our own men and our own women for answers and salvation is because of the Christ God, and because of their beliefs, their structures, everything it's not from here. So when you want to go for an answer in life, you go to a priest, a white priest. You don't look to your own people as saviors. You don't look to your own people as God. You look to the colonizers for all of your answers, spiritually, fucking politically, intellectually. That's who you're going to.
So check this out. In Lakota, one of the names for the president of the United States is Tunkashila.
What does that translate to? It
means grandfather, but it's also used interchangeably with the concept of God. So when you're praying to God, when you're praying to Tunkashila, the president of the United States, and he doesn't answer the prayer, now you know why.
And like for a fucking like a test, don't do this, but just think about this intellectually, hypothetically speaking. If you were to raise your kids using that word grandpa every time they saw the president of the United States in a ceremonial, holy way, what do you think that would do to their mentality, their relational reality?
I think it would create a miniature cult of one, where they believe that God is a transitive property that changes hands every 4 years.
Illegally sometimes?
Yeah. Also, one more thing about this, because this is actually getting close to the stuff I used to write about in Lakota pragmatism, my philosophy. The Gitz touched on something that's really true. If we do not decolonize, again, we're ready to talk about decolonization just a little bit here at the end. If we are not about to decolonize our minds and our spirituality, we're going to take the same notions of looking for an outside savior and then superimpose them on to our spirituality, where instead of looking for absolution for a priest, we pretend the sweat lodge is a confession booth. Or instead of looking for answers from Jesus, we're going to look towards a medicine man, or we're going to hope and pray that our quote unquote salvation, the improvement of our actual way of life, is going to come from an outside source. And this is why I used to be really dark. I've gotten more hopeful, by the way, but used to be like, there's no one coming to save you. You need to know, you need to give up all hope in your heart. Let it die inside of you, in your chonte, in your sinchun, your essence or your being. Let that hope die. Because there's no one coming. It's just you and your relatives and a handful of supporters.
Is this back when you used to hitchhike everywhere?
This is a little post hitchhiking. Oh my God, I can't believe they said that. That's really cool. All right, I'm gonna.
You have like, could do 2 more questions. I know I don't want to keep you, but do 2 more questions with you?
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to keep on going because I can stay on this all night.
I can too. Let's just get to these questions because I love this conversation. I miss hanging out with you, man.
Been a while.
Okay. This one's from Milo Zandy. Again, I apologize if I butcher all your names. Milo is a social work student. Every semester, they have an Indigenous focused class. They are taught about colonization, the damage CPS has done and continues to do to Indigenous families and communities, and traditional Indigenous ways of healing. Knowing the profession's history, I'm very nervous about unintentionally causing or contributing to harm. What can non-Indigenous peoples and the helping professions do to best help Indigenous peoples?
What it has a college student?
A social work student, yeah, post-secondary. CFS.
Oh, barbecue swirl. Girl, that's a tough one, man. Also, I think you gotta recognize that like the Hippocratic Oath is impossible. Like I'm going to work inside a colonial. It's like I'm going to be the good soldier in the army. It's like you're still a tool of empire inherently. I'm going to be the good cop. It's like, okay, you're still part of a capitalist structure who's designed to center property over people. So it's almost like you have to take a counter Hippocratic oath that I will do my best to do the least amount of harm and the most amount of good. It's like a very Wesleyan, even that's a Wesleyan like Christian philosophy, but it's also, dare I say, pragmatic. And I think you're dealt with a very difficult choice being a non-Indigenous do-gooder. Yeah. And first and foremost, you're recognizing incredible harm has already been done and continues to be done so. And you, like, hold on, wait a tick. As I'm looking back at like the good parts of the Indian child welfare workers, like the Indian Child Welfare Act, the idea was to keep the Indigenous kids in their community. Helping build actual infrastructure for families, advocating on a legal level for this. Like, for instance, one of the easiest changes in the world is to switch the subsidies from foster care to primary care. Like, on average, I think it's like you get $678 in assistance from the state to keep a child in poverty. But if you're a foster parent, you get between $1,400 and $1,700 a month per child. And so it's like, well, why don't you just get the resources to the parents and also give them like not just monetary resources, but actual like, hey, how's it going? Social work is one of the most difficult mixed bags, because it's like, I know children, babies who went through some of the most horrific abuse, and CPS wasn't there for them at all. And then I know other families that were like, they're not actually dysfunctional, they're just economically impoverished. And they call that violence or unsafe. Unsafe, that's the term that was used. Yeah, I think check out the comment section because you might have more, check out the chat because you might have more like helpful areas down there because, again, I'm simply but a poet.
I would say that the system is designed to take Native kids from their families. It's not broken. It's designed to do that. And you need to understand that's what you're going into. Like Mark was saying, you're going to be the good soldier who's still operating, who's still part of the regime. Are you that good clergy at the residential school who snuck a couple Indians some apples and some bread because they were being starved? Or did you fucking kill everybody, like all of the clergy, to free the kids? Did you create a system which is actually protecting them? Were you a part of this a movement that dissolved and recreated something new? Because you can't fix the system. It has to be broken. It has to be taken apart and a completely new and different revolution. The only way you're going to get that, as Kelly's pointing out, is aligning yourself and supporting those Indigenous leaders who are at the forefront, that are already addressing these issues, that already can see like 10 years down the road what we need, that are already specializing in that are way smarter than like myself or Tilsen or you, that have the fucking answers. They just are stuck in the system that just is trying to break them down and destroy them to keep taking away Indigenous kids. So there's that. Let's get to the next question. Yeah, I mean, like, Kelly's amazing. So just whatever she's going to spit, you just, here's me, here's Tilsen, here's Kelly. Just listen to her. This again from Morgan. Never asked to participate in anything as an adult. As a child, my family was asked, and it was clear we were never to talk about any of it or try to say it gave us any type of authority. Even when Dad was hired, I guess this is more. Though always supportive of Indigenous ceremony, is it a prerogative not to accept an invitation because no white person has earned the trust to be included, or am I being disrespectful? I mean, if you're being invited, I would just say go.
Depends. Like,
pay for everything.
I don't know, like, if you're being invited over to the Swallows, Sundance, and Porcupine, and there's nobody but white people be there, sus, very suspect. Meanwhile, you have legitimate relationships with some elders, and you're like, cool, and it's like, so, okay, all right, hold on. This is Mark Tilsen's critical mass theory of Washichu audience and spiritual performance. I actually spent some time talking about this, thinking about this, because I've been around it enough. There becomes a point in ceremony where there's a critical mass of whiteness. And sometimes that critical mass of whiteness is one person, and sometimes it's like 90%. But there's a critical mass of whiteness that can happen where this is no longer just an Indigenous ceremony. It has become an exploitive performance for the Washichu gaze. And because haven't yet unlocked the metaphysics to understand the level of Wakan particles in the air, I can't exactly quantify that critical mass. But I can tell you, you know it when you feel it, and you know it when you see it. And there becomes a point where it feels like, okay, this doesn't feel good anymore. And usually I don't go back to those places. And I mean, other times, oh, there's this person who they got married into a Lakota family and never tried to pretend to be Indian, but they got Lakota kids, and they're white folks and their white families there supporting. Yeah, there's white folks who are looking for healing for their Lakota kids, and it's like, oh, what am I going to do? Not pray for them? Of course.
Yeah. I like the thing though, like it's never fucking happened to me, but it's true. If you're you're going to an Indian ceremony and I say Indian, you're going to a ceremony and you got a bunch of fucking white people. There's some things going on, man, and I don't know what it quite is. I generally never feel safe, and I don't really feel it's authentic. Like there's a thing there where it's like, well, where's our people? Like, where the fuck are all our goddamn people? And that's up to you. If you want to go to the ceremony, there's tons of fucking white people, then go to the ceremony with tons of fucking white people. There's a good chance you're not going to see me there. Ever.
I'll never see you again. And I'm going to write that down. Mark Tilsen's theory of critical mass of whiteness.
I mean, I'm not just like, again, there could be something to be learned from these people, and it might be just how not to run ceremony. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, there's just a different way to be and different people to be around. So if they're asking you for money, like right off the hop, like if they're saying we need you to pay $500 for this sweat, then I wouldn't go. You know, you should voluntarily give that money up, though.
I mean, again, what do we think about? Like, that's what a whole other thing is about. Is like, there's white folks who exploit other white folks with Indigenous ceremony. There's Indigenous people who exploit white folks with Indigenous ceremony for monetary resources. And then there's Indigenous folks who exploit other Indigenous folks with ceremony for monetary gain. None of them feel particularly well. Don't feel particularly good. I'm working on this story that kind of explores some of this stuff called oh man, I can't even. No, I'm not even gonna say it. Yeah, never mind. But I'm working on a comic book that talks about a young man that goes on the road with his medicine man grandfather. To be continued. All right.
Okay, so let's get the next question. What advice do you have when white people are strategizing to get an Indigenous woman out of elected office? So a clan of white people are coming together to get an Indigenous woman out of office. What advice do you give, Mark?
I don't think I understand the premise.
There's I think it's always a thing that happens. Like so an Indigenous woman who's in office, who are strategizing to get this white people strategizing to get this Indigenous woman out of office. What advice do you give to help support this Indigenous woman?
Oh, the way you said it, it sounded like you were asking on behalf of the white people on how they can
effectively do it. How do you effectively get her out?
And I was like, well, you can bring up her past. I mean, that's always a vulnerable place. No, hold on. I gotta recoup and shut up for a second.
I think so. While you're recouping, I would say that I think she's already well aware that there are white people and her own people that are trying to get her out of office. And I think the answers would be directly talking to her. But then she might not trust you either, because like her guard has to be up, and it has to be up for survival. So
financially support. I mean, part of that is like just being like, if you, first off, let's say you believe, let's say, we're operating side of capitalism, the nation state, colonization, and electoral politics is a thing, and you're engaging in this thing, and we believe that it is a goodness or an inherent goodness that there's this Indigenous woman who has an elected office and she's hoping to do well, and you want to back and support her, like, be a badass organizer. Like, like like there used to be like, I used to roll into certain places and I would see it was almost universally young women who was like the Johnny on the spot with the next thing. And they would back Indigenous women, sometimes to the point where like they would make almost the disproportionate sacrifice of their own well-being. I'm not advising that, but there is those young folks who are just the Johnny on the spot as part of an organizing group, meaning we need X, Y, and Z to happen. And it's like sometimes it's not sexy. It's not like organizing the press and strategizing together. Sometimes it's just like, if you want to help her win the campaign, be a campaigner, be that Johnny on the spot. Which is a reference to World War II with the ammunition. It means showing up and doing the work, but like that's some rubber meets the road kind of old school organizing. We're gonna win an electoral campaign. Okay, out strategize, out maneuver, and outwork the competition, and help you the message get across. Yeah, like that's almost like one of the most fair fights you can win. And I think probably every Indigenous person who is attempting to run for office, it has the deck stacked against them.
Yeah. All right. So last question, unless anybody wants to ask us some more. This is from Christine Slow. How do we get contemporary colonization? I'm thinking World War II internment of Alaskan Natives specifically taught in our school systems, or at least within Native communities. Can we expect white folks to teach this when it is not demanded from within the affected groups?
What? Hold on, I got to read that question. I didn't quite catch it. How do we get contemporary the internment of Alaskan Natives specifically, or at least with the Native communities? Can we expect white folks to teach this when it's not demanded? Yeah. We get, like, I mean, in a good high school, or at the very least in college, you learn about the Japanese internment camps. And, you know, I've never had any, I didn't go to high school with any Japanese people. Like, there was not, like, the Holocaust survivors who were in my school. So we can talk about that, teach about that. How do you effectively do curriculum on that? There's probably companies who are already putting together whole packages about it. Like literally, like work with Indigenous people to develop that curriculum. Check to see if there already is Indigenous curriculum on it. Now the internment, yes, I was talking. No, the internment, it's not even taught within the village school system. Okay, the village school felt very much like the village people. Check, like literally look for curriculum that's been developed or is being developed by Indigenous educators that can be propagated and used. Like first, like I was putting on my high school educator check, there's first off, I do, we do, you do. Like we can learn about the stories of like what actually happened. Like what are the documented stories? I'm guessing that there's been oral history projects that have already been created that have been documented, the firsthand stories. I think probably we're getting towards the late end where there's actual survivors, because those folks got to be in their 80s and 90s by now. Yeah. So I think the oral history has already been written down in existence. You just got to do some research. But again, connect with Indigenous educators who are already working on this. Am I going to connect those folks to you? Probably not.
That's where your own work comes
you guys.
in. That's your own work. You got to make those connections.
Yeah. I assume you're in Alaska.
Yeah, I mean, we already have the solutions to a lot of our own fucking problems. and they're all different and they're all unique, and there's not going to be one that fits every single Indigenous communities. Go to the community you're thinking about right now and just ask how you can help. And they're prepared to sit down and just fucking listen. And
because some people will be like, by the way, that is really important. And we have X, Y, and Z that needs more resources than this current curriculum module. Because otherwise it's really difficult. Like, so the way that it would work down here in the lower 48 is if some person has this project and this inclination, they'll go over, exploit the already taken down research of other people, maybe just quote them, not even ask permission to use, package it, sell it off to one of the 5 to 10 companies that would buy it, and maybe even write themselves a grant so that they can get paid every step of the way. But again, this is like, if you're trying to work within the community, you actually have to go work with the community, being like, I really am interested in this. Is there anybody else can I connect to? And then you'd have to have, like, organically have those relationships built. Otherwise, it's really weird, because you can just write a grant and then package it and then do it. And you're like, oh, I got to make a living a little bit for my time. And then it's like coming in with an outside project where there's like, yes, that is important, but we have greater needs and those resources should go elsewhere.
Yeah.
All right.
So get to it. We got one last one from Gabrielle Yu. This is where Mark, this is where you can create your legend right here. This is where we make the myths. Could you guys share a little bit about the sacrifices you've had to make when you chose the path you guys are on? No. I'll say this, all right? I've had a lot of blessings in my life. And those all come from creation, creator. All the good qualities I have comes from my mother and all of the amazing women in my life. And all of the mistakes, they're all mine. Every single last one is mine. Sacrifices, that's for me in my life story. And if I choose to share that with anybody, it's because I want to. But if you need to know anything else about me, that's just that all the mistakes are 100% mine. That's all I'm going to say about mine.
Check it out in the book, marktilsen.com. I wrote a whole book on it.
I have it. I think I have it.
I don't know. Like, I've lived my life in such a way that I'm going through this really, really dark place of depression and isolation, and it's to the point where I've been fundamentally, my life's been fundamentally altered since Standing Rock. And I always, I've been hoping I'm going to bounce. Like, this past year, I helped run a homeless camp, and for about 9 months, and I've been hoping that, I'm going to spring back, and I'm getting it back into fighting shape and start eating more greens, start exercising, work. And it's like, I'm the most tired I've ever been in my whole life. And it's like all of the cumulative weight has caught up to me of, working until you're exhausted continuously over and over and over again. I've reached to the point where my body and my mind and my spirit is not self-healing or as elastic as it used to be as a younger man. And I'm tired. So somebody once posted this saying, when you meet your ancestors, what will you tell them? What will you tell them what you did with their sacrifices? And I say, on my bad days, I survived. And on my good days, I gave my all.
I would say, like, if I was to talk a little bit about Mark, and Mark doesn't want me to, it's fine. I have the fucking mic now, Mark. I would say that Mark, when he gets into these movements with people, like just kind of like echoing Che Guevara, Mark would always 100% tell you 100% of the time tell you he doesn't liberate people. You know, people liberate themselves. Mark will help, and I've seen him do this with like next to nothing, going from one occupation to this other occupation and scrounging around, you know, gas money to get there, to be with the people, because he believes and he sees that passion, that energy, the need, and giving himself fully. And then, you know, the pipeline goes through, or something camp falls apart because of fucking internal conflicts or whatever. All of that shit weighs on frontline activists like Mark. And he's not the only one. And if you were to fucking ask, if you would say like, well, this person gave up more than me, you know, and then there would be like, this person gave up less. But that's the way that Mark is. You got to know that with a lot of these frontline activists, there's a lot of trauma that they have because they've given their spirit and their time and their energy to these movements. And if we had like fucking like 5 Marks in one area, you know, you would have enough people to create that actual movement, that change. You'd actually see it. So yeah, that's what I'll say. There's a lot of activists out there, and you should be directly supporting them rather than something like the Indigenous Environmental Network. You need to like actually go to these people. Like Anahis Manuel is somebody you definitely need to like, you know, send some money to. The Wet'suwet'en Checkpoint, you just skip all of these Indigenous NGOs. And I'll say this, my cousin runs one in Edmonton. I don't give a shit. Skip her fucking organization and give the money directly to these frontline activists, because you'll never really know what if you really truly given up, and you don't know like what they're fucking dealing with at times, you know, but this is who you should be trying to help, like directly trying to help, because they've given up a lot. So that's all I had to say about that. Buy this book. It's a different color, but buy this book.
Cleve and Ali did that. Cleve and Ali did that cover, and my good friend Jackie Fawn did this cover, and it's like her badass recreation of a photo my dad took, and she has me out next to a giant moon in the Badlands. It's a great looking cover. The book's awesome.
The book is called "It Ain't Over Until We're Smoking Cigars on the Drill Pad." I read this to my daughter, by the way, because I want her to be fucking way, way, way more into this than me. Like way more into this activism, way more into like shaping and helping to change the world. So there's 2 things I want to end off on. The first is I do like taking part of this. We definitely need more Indigenous women that are here speaking, because as smart as we are, there is, I believe that there is, that the Indigenous women are smarter, but they have this innate connection and love that we don't have, that we don't register on. And I've said this before, and I think it comes from Paul Mooney, that Indigenous women will baby their men, their babies, their men and their women, but they'll baby their men babies because they know what the world is going to do to them. Even without fully knowing or comprehending, they know exactly what the world is going to, how it's going to treat them. So they keep them and they love them in such a divine, beautiful way. And like we just need to have more Indigenous women when we do these conversations. We do these little talks. The next one I probably won't be a part of, and I hope we have like even Kelly, somebody in the seat right here, because you want fucking knowledge dropped. That's where that needs to come from.
My mom was one of them radicals over at Wounded Knee back in '73, and she never said this, but it definitely was felt. Like she had sometimes it was difficult for her to have a lot of empathy for her kids because of the amount of traumas that she lived through and faced. It was like, oh, you're depressed? Did you ever get shot at with a 50 caliber machine gun by the United States Army? Have you? And she wouldn't say it, but she'd look at you and she'd just go, eh, and just kind of keep going. She had her own trauma. I've been thinking of, I'm going to say this about my mom. It's a funny joke, but it's true. And because we're mentioning Indigenous women, I have to bring it up. And I love my mom, even though we're not close. And I think I told Gitz this. It's like when I was a little guy, she used to give us this little medicine that would smell like a moldy weed when enemies were nearby. And it was supposed to protect you from bad medicine. And as kids, we thought, you know, aw, who's a special little guy? It's like, my mom protects me from bad medicine. And then, like, as a grown up, you're like, wait, Ma, why are you protecting us from like spells? Like, are you fighting with a coven of witches? Like, who curses children? What is going on that necessitates us to be prepared for spiritual warfare? Who are you grudging with? And just let me, you know what? I don't even want to know. I'm glad I don't know. I'm glad whatever beef you have in the spirit world, I don't have to know about. Ma!
Who's coming after you and your kids, Ma?
Yeah. That's my ma who had like that traditional, that like when you mix up traditional spirituality and Christianity, kind of becomes a little bit Santeria, a little bit like Northern Plains voodoo-ish.
Okay. I want to read one little quick poem from Mark's book. It's my fucking favorite. It's my favorite. And it's really quick. There's longer poems. These are like snapshots, really, of the moments of Standing Rock. So it's like only 4 lines. It's called Camp Life. Mm. It's not that we were free, not really, but on a clear day, we could see what freedom looked like. And that's it. Buy this book, although it doesn't look like this anymore. I have a book. I'm saying buy Mark's book. Buy a couple of them. Give them for fucking gifts. Give it to your little weirdo anarchist buddies. They'll have a field day with it.
Yeah, also that's one of my favorite poems too, by the way. Like, it was just, I hope I get that feeling once again in my life, because you could taste liberation. It was like, it tasted like having all of your needs met. It tasted like feeling safe and belonging. And it felt like going home to a place that you never knew that you missed.
Yeah. And I remember feeling this poem. I guess this is like one of my favorite Mark moments. I was about to leave. I came down. We fundraised some money with the Crow Child girls in Tsutina. And they did fucking awesome. Like the money that we brought down, the community came together, people donated art, and the band threw in money. And so we came down. There was me, Darlene McGinnis. I took my mom and my dad. This is right after the Fort Mac fire, right after we fucking lost everything. It was a good way to direct energy. And so we all went down to Standing Rock together, and we went to different camps, and we asked, like, what do you guys want? And then we would go buy them the stuff and bring it there. It was really cool. And so there's a moment where I was about to leave, and me and Mark were sitting on this hill, and I was like, well, what do you guys need? And Mark's like, well, winter's coming, so we're gonna need some serious trapper tents with the wood stoves. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And I was like, and I have a friend. I'm not going to name him drop him here, but I was like, I have a friend. He's kind of famous. I'll make sure he gets here. More famous than Dallas Goldtooth, believe it or not. And I was like, I can get him to come here. And Mark's like, yeah, okay. But we were just sitting on this hill and it felt like anything was possible. But I was also looking at Mark, who was looking at me, and I knew exactly what was on his mind. This guy's full of shit. He's not going to bring any tents down. He's not going to bring his famous friend. I'm never going to see him again. And, and then like a month later, we showed back up with tents, and that person, actually, you guys are still friends today.
Yes.
Not going to name drop.
Yes. Yeah. But that's exactly what I thought. You read my mind so clear. I think it's funny that my face didn't even attempt to hide what was going on in my head. Just okay.
Sure, you'll be back. Yeah.
Heard that.
Some tense, hey.
But that was the truth is most of the people who made a promise to come back did. Yeah. And so if somebody says, I'll see you again, they showed back up. And that's one of the defining characteristics of a successful movement is people show up for it. Knowledge. Little parting shot for y'all.
I'm Blackfoot. We say Kitera Matsun. So until we meet again.
Dog shot, okay.
That'll say I love all of you. If you're dealing with fucking some mental health issues, there's some support lines you can call. There's stuff online, check in with family and friends. And just know, man, like as low as you get, if you're battling addictions, or if you know someone that's battling addictions, tell them. And for fucking you, if you're listening to this right now, at your lowest, you still have people that love you. You still have people that believe in you. And just got to embrace that feeling, because you do give meaning and life and medicine to people's lives around you. You deepen this experience that we have. And I'm fucking going through shit. Mark's going through his shit. And you just got to know that, you know, like love all of you out there. Just thank you for sitting by. Are we done?
Yeah, we're good to go.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much. See you later. Bye.